Well, good evening. This is Bible Answers. We're going to be continuing our study in the book of John. Tonight, we're going to be looking at chapter 2. And feel free to follow along. We will have all of our verses on the screen. And this is brought to you by the North Columbus Church of Christ in Columbus, Mississippi, located on we're just off on Chubby Road. And so our website is northcolumbuschristians.com. You can find out more about us there. You can find some past sermons. Also, you can find us on YouTube. Our YouTube page is North Columbus Church of Christ, and you'll find previous Bible answer videos on there as well. And so we've been looking, really started looking rather through the book of John. We finished chapter 1 last week. And really, what we see in John chapter 1, we see John giving a descriptive, very descriptive description of Jesus, and not just describing him as a man, but really as God, that he has been here from the very beginning. He was with God. He was God. He played a part in creation, and so we see a description of Jesus. We see John the Baptist coming on to see, and then later in the chapter we see Jesus calling his disciples, and that takes us into John chapter 2. And so we'll have the verses here on the screen as well. And also, before we get started, this is a live show, but if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those here and I will try to respond to them. So in verses 1 through 7, it says, "On the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, 'They have no wine.' Jesus said to her, 'Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour is not yet come.' His mother said to the servants, 'Whatever he says to you, do it.' Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, 'Fill the water pots with water,' and they filled them up to the brim." And so, what we're going to start seeing is we're going to start seeing uh, really here start seeing more of Jesus's ministry. His 3 year ministry with ultimately will end in his crucifixion and his resurrection. And so it begins here with I would say a pretty famous miracle of Jesus, in that we're going to see Jesus turning the water to wine. And so this is all set in a wedding. It says that there's a wedding in Cana of Galilee. So again, we're in Galilee. We looked at a map last week in chapter 1 that much of where Jesus is going back and forth from is in the area of the Sea of Galilee. And so he's here at this wedding. We see the mother of Jesus there. And so he's it says Jesus and his disciples were invited to this wedding, and it says that they ran out of wine. And we see where Jesus's mother, which would be Mary, makes note of that to Jesus. And it's interesting his response to that. He says, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour is not yet come." Now, many will look at that and say that, I mean, that seems kind of rude, his response here. And I don't. I think this, maybe just, probably just a translation from the English, from the Hebrew language, and we see other times in which Jesus would call Mary woman. At the end of his life, his crucifixion, he will tell Mary, "Woman, behold thy son." And I don't think he's using this in a way that is rude. I have read that this is that the what is being said here in the Hebrew language again is was like an idiom that could be compared to us currently using the word ma'am or madam today. Now I don't not sure about that, but I think it could be the case, and regardless of that, I do think that he's not saying this in some rude, blunt. Just Jesus here is not in a bad mood, and what he's saying is, what does this have to do with me? Right? They ran out of wine, and his mother comes to him, and you would think about that if he's invited to some wedding, why would somebody who's invited to the wedding, why would somebody be running to him, telling them that they run out of wine or that they run out of food or whatever it may be? This is, what am I going to do about this? But notice what he also says. He says, "My hour has not yet come." And it seems as though here that Mary Mary seems to have some inclination of what of who Jesus was, what he could do, and we see Jesus. I think given some hints here. He says, "My hour has not yet come; that I'm not going to reveal myself in some way." We do know that many times, again referencing back to other scriptures, that he would not want others to let it be known of miracles that he has done, and that he's just saying that the time is not yet. Just hold off on this. That all what I'm doing. I'm trying to set these things up, but it's not. I haven't got to the point where I want to fully reveal myself. And it seems this is what's going on here as well. That it seems again, apparently Mary has some inclination of who Jesus is, that he has some power here. Maybe and maybe she thinks she can help her out, and even in a non-miraculous way. But we see again that he's saying this really isn't my problem. This is not a big issue. But we do see where, regardless of that interaction, that he does uh, go on and help Mary definitely solve this problem. Notice his mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." So apparently, he's made it clear, regardless of what he said in the previous verse, that he's going to help her. And so they have these 6 water pots of stone. It says they're 20 or 30 gallons apiece. So you could say 180 gallons of water that they're going to have in these water pots. And it says that they filled them up to the brim. So, I mean, that's a lot of water. And they got to do something with it. And so that takes us to verses 8 through 10. It says, "And he said to them, Draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast. And they took it. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now." And so he tells him, take it to the master of the feast, take some of this water that was out of this water pot. And we know and we see how the master reacts to this. That he says, if you set out the good wine first, the good tasting wine, the best of the best, all right? And then when they have well drunk, then they set out the lesser quality. So we put out the best first, and then we lower the quality when they have well drunk. But it says here, you have kept the good wine until now. And so this was the good stuff. This was the best of the best. And so, with this miracle here, a lot of people will turn to this miracle and say that Jesus is okay with people imbibing in alcoholic beverages and just drinking as much as they want to. And one thing to point out in regards to that is what the master says. And so we know in the New Testament that it's clear that Christians are not supposed to be or get drunk. That they should not live in drunkenness. They should be of a sober mind. And what we need to pay attention to is what Jesus would be doing if this wine that Jesus is putting out, if it is actually of a very alcoholic nature. And so we see the master's response that you wait until you set out the good wine to the last, when you should have put it out at the very beginning. And so if this is alcoholic wine, notice what would have been going on here, that the guests would have been there. They would have drunk all the initial wine, and just like what the master said, when they had well drunk, then Jesus would have been setting out even stronger alcoholic wine after that. And so after they have well drunk, after they have already, again, if this is alcoholic wine, after they are well drunk, then he's putting out even stronger wine. And so clearly letting these individuals go into drunkenness, that these people would clearly be drunk after they had partaken of this wine. And so this is a particular problem with me by saying, okay, well, this is just wine, just like what we would call wine today. And I simply don't agree with that based on what we see in other New Testament scriptures, because again, this would be Jesus letting people and providing the means of letting people become very, very drunk. And I don't just, it is not compatible with what Jesus preaches. And so we can study and see that a lot of times when uh, this grape juice is described as wine, this is definitely not of an alcoholic nature of what we would consider wine today. And more likely that this was just grape juice. And certainly I think that Jesus could make this wine that was a very, very good tasting, uh, and yet it not be alcoholic at all. And so I think these are some points that we need to consider with that, and especially with those that would like to take this miracle as approval towards, drinking, just getting drunk, and just engaging in drinking these alcoholic beverages are pretty regular, because we see that it's pretty clearly condemned in the New Testament, and I would argue that it's condemned in the Old Testament as well. And so, again, just some things for us to consider. But the main point here is that Jesus has done a notable miracle, that these people, that they're witnesses. He's had 180 gallons of water, and then all of a sudden this has turned to wine, and really good wine. And that he can't do that in a matter of seconds. And so, again, a very notable miracle that has taken place here. Verses 11 through 16, it says, this beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum, he, his mother, his brother, and his disciples, and they did not stay there many days. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and he found in the temple there who sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers doing business. When he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, take these things away. Do not make my father's house a house of merchandise. So as a result of this miracle of turning water into wine, it says that his disciples believed what he was done. Notice in verse 11, it says this was the beginning of signs Jesus did in that area. And so they're going down to Capernaum, and then they're making their ways to Jerusalem. And so we see another situation that, again, is pretty well known. And we see where Jesus goes into the temple. This was during the Passover. And before we get into this, remember that there were Jews, they're in Israel, but there's also Jews scattered abroad across the world. I mean, there's some, more into Europe. There's Jews in Africa that we know of. And so these Jews would be, during this time, would be coming to Jerusalem, We also know, if we look back at the old law, that there was a temple tax in which these individuals were supposed to pay, and that it was supposed to be, if I remember, it was like a half shekel, but it would be the Jewish money. And so you would have these people that were from different parts of the world, that they would have their money, and then basically they would have to be exchanging currency for this temple tax. We also know that these individuals would need some animals to make sacrifice. And of course, if you're coming from Europe, it is not impossible, but it is an inconvenience to be carrying these animals along with the ride that you were fixing, or the ride, or the walk that you're fixing to take. And so these people would be selling these animals. And what is called the money changers, these would be these individuals that are basically exchanging these currencies. And so there has been much said outside of Scripture about these individuals that were selling these animals, or the money changers, and that these people were engaging of, they were taking advantage of people, especially with of poor people, and really just trying to make as much money as they could uh, for themselves. And I don't particularly doubt that what was going on. We do know that in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament as well, that God particularly despises people that take advantage of the poor, and just take advantage of people in general. And so this kind of sets up the stage for what Jesus does here. So these money changers, they're setting, they're exchanging currencies. They're selling these animals. It's again possible. Now remember, it's not said here, but it's possible that it could be taking advantage of people. And so we see what Jesus does, and notice what he does. He does not just say, "You need to stop doing this. You need to stop taking, advantage of people. You need to stop just doing this in general." Notice what he does. He says, when he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overturned the tables. And so he's hot, to say the least, about what is going on. And so much so that he drives them all out. He's knocking over these tables. And so this would have been quite a scene. And so again, he's in the temple. There would be priests, a lot of people in this area. And you can imagine what would be on their minds when they see Jesus doing this. And notice what he says. He says, "And he said to those who sold doves, 'Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise.'" And so, again, I've already mentioned that it's possible that these people could be taking advantage of poor. Maybe they're exchanging currencies, and instead of, for example, a half shekel being worth two Roman coins, maybe they're saying, well, it takes three Roman coins to make a half shekel, and so they're making a little money on the side. It could be, but again, Jesus doesn't say that here. He says, "Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." Y'all are setting up a business in my Father's house. We got people running just normal everyday businesses in the temple, where God's presence would be here. And this is what gets Jesus so fired up with this, that they're putting the common, they're mixing the common with the uncommon. They're mixing the holy with, again, things that are just everyday things. And it's just, it's like going down to the gas station and picking up some food and some honey buns or whatever it may be. And we got this going on in the midst of the temple. And it's always interesting. I always think about these different churches today, that they're calling themselves the people of God. They're saying they're coming to a particular place and worship, and while they're there, we got a coffee shop here, we're selling books there, and we're just running the business, in the same place where we're claiming that we're going to be coming together to worship God. And I think about this, what would Jesus think about all of this going on? And I think that he would have the same response. Don't make my Father's house a house of merchandise. Don't become the place again where you're going to be worshiping God, where the presence of God is, where you're doing all these sacred things for God, and you're out here just running a business. And we see how Jesus responds to that. That he has no care for any of that. Verses 17 through 23 says, Then his disciples remember that it was written, Zeal for your house has eaten me up. So the Jews answered and said to him, What sign do you show to us since you do these things? Jesus answered and said to them, Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then the Jews said, It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days? But he was speaking of the temple of his body. Therefore, when he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this to them, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs which he did. And Jesus did not commit himself to them because he knew all men and had no need that, I need to turn this off. And he had, let me see if I can turn this banner off real quick. And he had no need that anyone should testify of man, for he knew what was in man. So his disciples, seeing this, remembering what was written, zeal for your house has eaten me up. That again, he's so concerned about God, the proper worship God, making sure that we're making that proper distinction of what is holy and common, and he's just eaten up by that. And we notice Jesus' reaction, and really, I don't. I mean, that's. I'm just thinking. I think that's the strongest reaction we see from anything of what he's done. We know that he's had some pretty strong conversations with people throughout his life, but we don't see that just. It's like he's going to war with these people. And, we would probably describe it as particularly violent reaction towards the money changers and those selling those offerings. And it's because of his zeal. And we see, so this is going on. And the Jews say to him, What sign do you show us since you do these things? So you are showing us that, and in that we see what he's done. We see the miracles that he's performed earlier. You're doing these things, so it looks like you're claiming to have some type of authority. So what do you show us? What sign are you going to show us? And he says, we're destroy this temple, and I'm going to in 3 days, I'm going to raise it up. And so these people and the disciples misunderstand what he's saying here. They think that he's going to actually destroy the temple and then rebuild it in 3 days. And so they think, well, that's impossible. It takes us 46 years to build this temple. You say you yourself are going to rebuild it in 3 days, and so that's just completely impossible. But he's not talking about the temple here. He's talking about his body. And he's talking about that he's going to die. He's going to be crucified. And then he's going to be resurrected. So he's describing his body as a temple here. And so at this time, they don't know what he's talking about. They think he's crazy. This impossible for you to rebuild this temple. But notice what it says. He says, therefore, when he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this to them, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus has said. So after the fact, after he had risen, they realized this. They put the pieces together. Currently, they don't understand, but they will later. And notice what it says. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs which he did. So he performs miracles. He's also teaching. It says many believe in him. But notice what it says. It says, but Jesus did not commit himself to them because he knew all men. So in the New King James, which we're reading out of, it says he did not commit himself to them. I think other translations would say did not entrust himself to them. It's interesting because this word commit or entrust, if you look at the Greek, that it's very close to the same word we would use as believe or faith. and it gives the idea that he did not completely trust them. Of course, they believe in him, but when you look throughout his ministry, many don't believe in him for because he is who he said, because he's a son of God. Many believe in him because of what the miracles they seen. Well, he can heal a sick family member, or he can provide us food. They see these miracles, and they may say, and it says here that they do believe him, but there's not a it seems for the most part, a lot of people that believe during this time was not with the proper motivations. And I think this is what's going on here, that he did not commit himself to them, that they may have believed, but it was not not at least all of them, it was not of a just a particularly, I would call it a saving proper faith here. That he understood that many of these people did not have the right motivations for their belief in him. And so he says, because he knew all men and had no need that anyone should testify, man, for he knew what was in man. He knew what was going on in their hearts. He knew that there would not be many that would actually, truly, completely, sincerely believe in him and have faith in him. And so, if there's a big, huge crowd following Jesus, hundreds or thousands or whatever it may be, chances are that there's many of them that they may be saying, "Hey, we believe you. We see what's going on," but they're following him because of what they perceive that they can get out of him currently. Again, healings, food, whatever it may be, for this current present time. And so that ends us in chapter 2. We'll slowly continue to make our way through the book of John. The next time we'll start looking at John chapter 3. But again, we see the beginning of Jesus' ministry. We see the beginning of his miracles, and we see some very, I would say, notable, famous uh, miracles, and then interactions with the people, with the Jews in this chapter. Again, if you got any questions or comments, feel free to leave it here. Also, we have our YouTube page. You can find our videos there as well. But until next time, I hope that you all have a good day and a good rest of the week. Thanks.